It's Friday morning. It's another Friday. It's time again for Chip Talks. We're going to talk about salt today. So, we're going to have some fun. We're going to talk about salt. We're going to try not to get too technical with salt. There's a lot of technicality, let's say, with salt, and it's a major thing inside of us. And it does a whole lot of stuff, let's say. And so we're going to look at it kind of in terms of bacteria a little bit. We're going to look at it in terms of health. And so we're going to talk a lot about salt. And salt is definitely something that, let's say, we've been less misled about, would be a minimalist statement. So it's important, and it's important that we discuss it. It's important for our ionic well-being, our electricity, and if you really think about what determines life, right? So, what does it mean to be alive? What does it mean for something to be alive versus something to be dead? What definitely has to do with, electricity, with VEV, with, moving electrons, right? So, dead things move electrons slower, don't move them at all, and live things move them quick, and you have to have a lot of ionic flow. Well, salt is pretty important to all that, right? So, and salt is important to how we regulate water. It's important to how we manage our blood pressure. It's important to how nerves, function. So, it's super important inside of our body. So, we're going to dive right on in there. Sorry to be a little bit late this morning. We had some few technical difficulties here that we have now overcome. We're not in Tulsa, though, thank goodness. If you're in Tulsa and you still are without power, hang in there. I don't know how you're watching this. If you're without power, hopefully on a cell phone. But if you do have power, then welcome back. But that was a horrible thing that happened up in Tulsa. And, our hearts and minds and prayers were with all you guys up in Tulsa over this last week. Anyway, let's dive right in. So, again, we're going to talk about salt today. And there's so much to talk about here. And again, I'll try not to get too much into the complexities of this because this can get super complex really, really fast as to what salt does. But, so it just if you go to Google and again, a tip, all right? So as you go and research this on your own, because I know some of you guys like to do this on your own and research on your own, if you just put salt, in Google, you're going to get a whole bunch of you're going to get a lot of information about what we would call salt, sodium chloride, but you're also going to get information and studies and stuff about, ion salts, all different kinds of ion salts, so there's lots of different types of salts that are not NaCl. But what we're going to talk about today is sodium chloride, which is NaCl, which is you need, and which is what's in the ocean, and what we think of as table salt. All right, but there's lots of different kinds of salt. So when I say salt, that's a broad and general category. But today we're just going to talk about sodium chloride. So the human body requires a small amount of sodium, and so sodium is a metal, and sodium will conduct ions, so it will move electricity. And that's the nice thing about metal. Metals are conductive, and some metals are more conductive than others. But sodium is a nice conductive metal, and it will move ions. And so the human body requires a small amount of sodium to conduct nerve impulses. So again, nerves are electric, right? And so we've got to have some sodium to be able to move that electric potential down through us in order to contract and relax muscles. So contracting, relaxing muscles is kind of a similar exercise, and we have to be able to move ions and conduct electricity to be able to do that. And we need to be able to maintain the proper balance of water and minerals. So salt is important to, let's say that we found that someone was trace mineral deficient, right? So we didn't have enough of some trace minerals that we need. Well, how do we get those trace minerals, and how do we retain them? Salt, all right? So it's very, very important to what we're all about. What is the role of sodium chloride in the body? It helps to regulate the amount of fluid and types of nutrients going in and out of the cells. This is super important to what I am studying right now. So this is why I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole, because I get all excited about this. And most of what's wrong with us is bacteria, right? So we get bacteria, fungus, parasite, virus, right? So, and I just call that bacteria, so it's probably a bad thing, but I just sort of lump all that, just like salt, because a big broad bacteria for me is a big broad category. But in order for these guys, bugs, to get inside of you, they have to be able to get inside of a cell. Well, it turns out that the less healthy you are, the more permeable or accessible your cells are. Okay? So the less you sort of lose your health, the less ability you have to control the permeability of your cell membranes. And it turns out that salt is important in that permeability of cell membranes. So it helps to regulate the amount of fluid and types of nutrients going in and out of cells. So salt is helping move things in and out of those tight or loose, cell barriers. So this is super important in, like, let's say, pathogenic invasion, how these guys get in you, how they stay in you, and all that. So we want tight junctions, tight. We want not a lot of cell permeability, but then we have to have the right nutrients to be able to move things and liquids in and out of our cells to be able to do things, to do work, to get fuel and all that inside of them. So salt is super important. Okay, so and again, this is just more on the permeability, but sodium chloride, that's salt, NaCl, causes an increase in permeability because it is a negative salt due to the fact that the protoplasm is negatively charged. So here's where I could go way deep down a rabbit hole, but I'll just sort of explain this real quick. So if you have a negative charge inside of a cell, and you have, for the most part, positive charges out here, in order to permeate this cell membrane, you have to create a negative charge, at least a point charge, and that will allow permeability, right? So that'll allow negative to negative. You can think of it as like a magnet, so you have positive over here and negative over here. They're going to repel each other, but a negative to negative is going to more, well, no, it's actually the other way around, but you're creating a potential barrier. Like you can think of it as magnetics repel each other, or if you put them the right way, they will align and they'll attract each other. So this is kind of what's going on inside of a cell and what salt kind of helps to do. So too technical, probably. Sorry, we'll leave that alone for another day. Okay. So, high salt diet induces depletion of lactic acid producing bacteria in urine gut. So this salt stuff, and again, we're going to talk about how much salt a little bit. I'm not really sure. That's kind of what this is going into. It's very hard to find out how much salt you need, okay? So this is what I want to illustrate this point through sort of some of these studies is how much salt should we eat? How much is enough? How much is not enough? Do we get enough? Well, part of the evidence of this is this helping us with our bacteria, right? So is it helping us with our microbiome? Is it helping us with the bad bacteria? Is it, helping us with the good bacteria? So that's got to be part of the question that we look at with salt, and it turns out that's kind of mixed, and I'll get into that, more as we sort of talk through this. But this was a study where they looked at high salt diets and what those would do to the gut biomes of these purine. I got all that going on in my head. So these mice. So this was a mice experiment or a mouse experiment. But I'll just read it to you. We also observed significant reduction in relative abundances of bacteria associated with immunocompetent short-chain fatty acid production. So what that's saying is that when you're immunocompromised, what does that mean? It means you've got a lot of bacterial overgrowth, and it means you've got a lot of short-chain fatty acids that are associated with bacteria, but also associated with being immunocompromised, okay? So we also observe significant reduction in relative abundances of bacteria associated with immunocompetent short-chain fatty acid production from Bifidobacterium, that guy that I can't pronounce, the other guy, and Lactobacillus, in high salt diet fed mice, along with significant enrichment of Clostridia, Alstipes, and Akkermansia, depending on the sodium content in the food. Furthermore, the predictive functional profiling of microbial communities indicated that the gut microbiota found in each category presents differences in metabolic pathways related to carbohydrate, lipid, and amino acid metabolism. So that's kind of a big deal. The presented data show that high salt diet causes disturbances in the ecological balance of the gastrointestinal microflora, primarily through depletion of lactic acid producing bacteria in dose dependent manner. So is it good for you or bad for you? Yeah, this is what, this is kind of crap I read all the time. But look up here. So what this is saying is it's actually good for you. It's saying that a high salt diet, and what defines a high salt diet? Thus, we investigate the effects of different sodium, so NaCl salt content in food at 0.03%. That would be sodium deficient. That's not enough. 0.5%. That's control, and then 4% and 10%. 4% of the diet was salt, 10% of the diet was salt. But again, it didn't necessarily have a bad effect. It kind of had a good effect on the microbiota, on the bacteria. Now, we're going to talk about where this might have a bad effect in a second. So please don't go out and start, eating 4% of your diet as salt. That's not what I'm saying. But we probably are saying that we're not eating enough salt. And so I think we'll come to that conclusion by the end of this. Okay, so can bacteria... The other thing about salt is it helps us produce iodine, okay? So it helps us produce iodine. And iodine is really important in how we defend ourselves against bacteria. So I just want to kind of make that point. So without salt, you're not really doing the iodine thing, and iodine is pretty important. Now, can salt hurt things? Kinda. I mean, this was interesting. So if you look at H. pylori, a lot of us have H. pylori. I have H. pylori. Many people are infected with H. pylori, and H. pylori is something that is very difficult to kill. We've got ways to knock it back. So, I can get it kind of knocked back, and I do that all the time with me. And we can get it to where it's not necessarily super duper, harmful. Eventually we'll be able to kill it. And again, how do we kill it? With these electrolytes, and with understanding basically how these ions move and what these guys are doing with ions. But this is not studied enough yet to really be able to understand that. So what we do know is that in certain cases, H. pylori kind of likes salt, and it'll kick him off. He'll either get angry and do things, or he likes it and it makes him, bloom in certain circumstances. But I wanted to pull up this study because this was a let's see, is this a well-cited study? I don't know, but it's 503 children. Okay, so that's a pretty good size study. And so just the results, we found that 28.2% of children were infected with H. pylori at 4 years of age with a daily sodium intake that exceeded World Health Organization recommendations in 26% of those kids. No statistically significant association between sodium intake and H. pylori infection was observed, with the exception of the second quarter in the score concerning consumption of other food items in the assessment at 6 months of age. So basically conclusion, no association between sodium intake and H. pylori infection was found. However, to the best of our knowledge, the present epidemiological study is the first to test the influence of sodium intake on H. pylori infection in children. And that's true. So it's, new, right? So we don't really know how salt does with pylori. So the only reason I'm pointing that out is it's looking like salt is going to be a pretty good thing for us to up, and a pretty good thing for us to up as far as fighting bacteria and things like that. But at the same time, if you have heart issues, again, we'll talk about that in a little bit, you might tweak off your pylori, and we just don't know. We don't know. And in a perfect world, this would harm pylori, and I think that's probably, what's going on. But there's not enough data here, right? So here's another study, and this study is, gosh, I didn't know it was that far into it. So this is a 2008 study, so this is a little bit older data. So it's, kind of hard to get data is what I'm saying here. There's not a lot of data here. But here we show that H. pylori responds to changes in concentration of sodium chloride in its environment in such a way that growth, cell morphology, survival, and virulence factor expressions are all altered by increasing salt concentrations. Now, is that saying that we're going to make H. pylori worse? Not necessarily. It's saying that it gets tweaked when you put salt on it. It don't like it at all. So moreover, the strain-specific differences that we observe providing increasing evidence suggesting that diet and strain of H. pylori with which a person is infected may greatly affect the disease outcome. Okay? So the strain of H. pylori apparently is important in its resistance to salt. So, and this was 2008. We probably know more than this, but again, in my poking around, it's hard to get data here. So generally, salt is going to help. I should show this because these are different types of bacteria, right? And so salt is going to help with some of these, and salt is not going to help with others. But there's just different bacteria that like different environments, let's say, and salt will potentially promote some of these and demote others. And so we just need to understand that with salt and bacteria. And it's important. The bacteria is important because, again, that's what's wrong with most of us. So if you have a health issue, it's likely going to be related, unless you have some trauma or acute type situation, it's likely going to be related to some kind of bacteria. And so we need to understand how they live. What do they need? What are they eating? How are they taking resources from us? Are they affecting salt? Are they affecting our ionic balance? Are they affecting our fatty acid balance? Are they affecting our amino acid balance? Oh, look, amino acids. Although amino acids play an important role in the development of microbial resistance, they also offer a solution to the very same problem, i.e. amino acids have been used to develop antimicrobial peptides, as they are highly effective and less prone to microbial resistance. Other important applications of amino acids include their role in antibiofilm agents. So anyway, all that to say, amino acids are important in sort of our immune system and how we're fighting bacteria, in addition to things like salt. Okay, so how else does salt work? Well, we kind of know that salt is involved. Most of us, from our, let's say, high school, physiology classes, we know that salt is involved in nerves, in muscle contraction. So, if I have let's say a muscle, sort of strung out and I shock it, that muscle is going to contract, right? You guys, we've all been on a TENS device. Well, that happens by electricity, but that happens by salt, okay? So if you don't have sodium chloride in that muscle, ain't going to contract. If you don't have sodium chloride in that nerve, you're not going to propagate a nerve event. So it's because of electricity, and it's because salt conducts electricity. Now, I want to compare and contrast. We're all just like a big jug of water, right? 68% of us, or 68% of us, 65, 68, same percentage as water on the earth is water inside you, which is interesting. Now, if I put a bunch of salt in you, you're going to be super electric. You're going to be super conductive. You're going to be able to move electrons around inside of you. You're going to be able to do all these electrical reactions. In order for you to produce energy to move around, you've got to move electrons. That's what mitochondria do. That's what the whole electron transport chain is. When I say, glucose, fats, light, that all equates down to moving ions around. So you've got to be able to move ions around in order to produce energy, electricity, to do work in your body, to do all this. If you're a big sugar water solution, you can't move ions. It's the easiest way to make you dull, to make you not electric, is to just fill you full of processed sugar. You can play this game at home, fill a glass with processed sugar, try to move electricity through it, electrode to electrode. You're going to have a lot of resistance on a voltmeter. Do it with salt. You're not going to have much resistance. That's because the electrons move in salt. And this is the bottom line of why this is so important. This is the underlying. But it's so easy for me to go down this rabbit hole, and I know I'll lose you guys if I go too far down the rabbit hole here. Okay, so are some salts more healthy than others? Well, kinda, but sodium chloride is sodium chloride. So NaCl is NaCl. You can't make a more healthy NaCl. You can I guess, energize NaCl and make it more energetic, just like it can kind of strengthen water and, condition water and do things like that. And what does that mean? It means you hit it with a bunch of energy and all the electrons move out to the outer shells, and that guy's storing a whole lot of energy at that point. So you can kind of do that with anything, frankly. So it's, but generally salt is salt. So NaCl or NaCl is NaCl. So what is like sea salt, versus Himalayan salt and all that? It's really just a question of the additional trace minerals and other elements, that might be in that sea salt. So or salt. And that's when you're buying salt, that's what I would look for is, again, ideally you're getting some good trace and maybe some iodine, with the salt. And that's kind of what you want to have. You want to give your body those nutrients in the form of salt, or NaCl, and that's a really good way to do it. Down here on pink Himalayan salt, so everybody kind of gets wrapped around the axle about pink Himalayan salt. So some salts are considered healthier than others, such as pink Himalayan salt and different types of sea salt. These are revered for their taste and texture compared to regular table salt, and it is a better taste and texture, I would say. They are also preferred by some because most, but not all, are less processed and may contain more trace minerals. So that's kind of the bottom line is, table salt is pretty processed NaCl. I mean, it may be iodized, but it's just NaCl. With some of these other salts, you're getting a lot of other, elements and minerals with them and in them, and that's beneficial because we need lots of stuff. I mean, we need to move ions around, and our cells are really good at sort of adapting, right? So in doing, if we have a better material, we'll use it. If we have a worse material, then we'll try to get around it and not use it, right? So and cells do that. They just do that kind of by design, which is really, really cool. All right, so this is just, I want to make this analogy too to, we're kind of a big bag of water, right? So if we're a big bag of water full of salt, then we're pretty electric, and there's some other nice properties that I want to talk to you about light that happen. If we're a big bag of sugar, water-filled sugar, again, none of this happens the way that it should. We're dull, all right? So this was an experiment with salts and irradiation with UV light. So would salts potentially alter the ability of UV light to do things? We know UV light is disinfecting. Is salt going to help UV light be disinfecting? Pretty important for you to know, right? Because the more salt you have in you and the more you get in the sun, it's literally that easy. The more disinfecting power that you will have in your immune system. And what I'm trying to teach you guys is just about your immune system. All I'm really trying to teach you about is how your immune system works and the power that you have in your immune system. And we've got to understand our immune system. Otherwise, we'll get possessed, if you will, with bacteria, with a bunch of stuff that shouldn't be inside of us. So we got to understand our immune system. But isn't it cool that this big high-level, high-ticket item that we need, salt, is going to tie back to light and water? I mean, that's just stunning to me. It's so biblical and spiritual. It's just almost off the hook. The results suggest that the attachment of staph aureus cells isolated from atopic dermatitis lesions to the cover slip is suppressed in the presence of 10% salts and irradiation with UVA and UVB, and that plasma coagulation of staph cells isolated from atopic dermatitis lesions is suppressed in the presence of 10% salts, irradiation with UVA, and heating. Wow, that's pretty cool. So, we should all have salt potentially in our deodorant, is kind of what this is saying, and have our arms up a lot, because staph is kind of what causes BO and all that. But you guys get the idea that light helps all this go better. And here's another evidence of that. So the effect of ultraviolet light on the sodium and potassium composition of resting yeast cells. So what happens to at least yeast cells under these conditions? So the sodium and potassium content of non-metabolizing yeast cells was determined before and after monochromatic ultraviolet irradiation. UV facilitated the uptake of sodium into and the loss of potassium from the cells. Now, why is this important? Do you have enough salt, and are you able to uptake enough salt? Well, if you're not in the sun enough, this is indicating that that potentially you won't facilitate the uptake of sodium into cells. You won't facilitate this, element that you need into cells. And again, this is light oriented and kind of water oriented. The loss of potassium from cells, so net ion flux. So this is ion flux, and again, this is important. Electricity. The effect, you can't contract a muscle without electricity, okay? The effect is greatest for the shortest wavelength employed, 239 micrometers. And is partly, sorry, it's a weird thing, but it should be nanometers, really, and is partly dependent upon the presence of oxygen. The UV effect on net ion flux persists for at least 90 minutes, during which tests were made, and it occurs following dosages which are without measurable effect on colony formation. The UV effect on net ion flux is decreased by acidity and promoted by alkalinity. So this is another thing, as we deplete, as we use energy, let's say, it's, what is the depleted, uranium, so to speak? It's hydrogen. So we have hydrogen, atoms that are just kind of sitting there dead, and that creates acidity. That's what creates acidity. So how do you reinvigorate those hydrogen items? We have to have some OH, so you have to have some alkalinity, and that alkalinity will reinvigorate, those negative ions will reinvigorate those sort of dormant H ions. So anyway, sorry, went down the rabbit hole too far there, probably. Anyway, a lot here. So, and you can hopefully getting the idea that salt plays this role in electricity and how we move electricity in our body, and how we uptake salt. Again, how we uptake salt is determined by kind of this UV flux, right? Okay. So the mechanisms of sodium absorption into human small intestine. So again, if I give you, here's your bucket of salt, drink it, are you going to absorb it all, and is that going to be detrimental to you? It's really the question that we're asking. Still kind of asking that, what is enough, and can we get too much? So it's kind of looking like we can't get too much unless you have pylori, and if you have pylori, it might tweak things off. So it's just, be advised, and it might help things, and it probably is going to help things overall, because it's looking like salt really helps our immune system. It helps our electricity, and our immune system will eventually defeat pylori. That's the ultimate thing of how to, let's say, kill these bugs, is we let our immune system kill them. We don't find things out here that are going to kill them. We let our immune system kill them. But in order to do that, we have to understand our immune system and how to power it and how to run it. So it certainly has electric aspects, and salt is super important. Okay, so the mechanism of sodium absorption in human small intestine. The major part of sodium absorption, for instance, sodium chloride absorption, that's the one that we're after, appeared to be mediated by a process of bulk flow of solution along osmotic pressure gradients. All right, so, okay, pressure. Well, not really. Aldosterone, and again, this hormone, you have to have this hormone present in order for you to pick up salt. So aldosterone is a hormone that helps regulate your blood pressure by managing the levels of sodium, salt, and potassium in your blood and impacting blood volume. Having too much or too little aldosterone in your body can cause health issues. Aldosterone is part of, you all remember that, COVID affects something called ACE2, or the ACE2 neuroreceptor. ACE is part of the angiostatin system, and angiostatin is deeply tied to aldosterone. So aldosterone is really part of your whole heart process and how we regulate. Let's just do this real quick. Let's do this, because we'll do heart, and I spelled it wrong, but we'll get it. And you can just, you're going to find a lot of studies if you do this search on aldosterone and cardiovascular disease, how much of a role that aldosterone plays in cardiac disease, and it plays a significant role in cardiac disease, okay? So aldosterone is really the regulator of both water, so your ability to retain or hold water, and also your ability to retain and hold salt, because your ability to retain and hold salt is how you retain and hold water. Okay, making sense? Pretty complicated? Kinda. All right, we'll plow on. So aldosterone is a steroid hormone synthesized in and secreted from the outer layer of the adrenal cortex, the zona that word. I hate trying to pronounce words live. I could practice them again and again and again. I probably should. But anyway, so aldosterone is created in the adrenal cortex. Again, it is a, let's see if we can get this graphic up. Yeah, that's what I want. I'll show you this breakdown, provided I can get the graphic up. We'll talk about other things. We'll think about other stuff. And we still don't have the graphic. Perfect. Sorry, guys. This is what I want to show you, though. Open image in new private tab. Oh, yeah, it's a mini image. All right. Oops. So, big thing that I want to show you is this, cholesterol. So where does aldosterone come from? It comes from cholesterol. Now, how does this go back to sort of our bigger picture of stuff? Well, fasting and fed, boys and girls. Again, if you're fed, you're making cholesterol, so you're producing cholesterol. And again, you've got to produce cholesterol in order to build aldosterone, so you got to be able to do that. But it doesn't, you don't do any of these breakdowns at all. We kind of do in certain micro situations, but generally on the macro, you don't do any of these major breakdowns until you're in a fasted state. So when you're fed, you're making cholesterol. When you're fasted, you are breaking down cholesterol into pregnenolone, progesterone, that one, corticosteroid, I hate pronouncing these, and then finally aldosterone. Again, you can continue these breakdowns to, where's the estrogens on here somewhere, 17 estradiol, and also testosterone. Okay, so estrogen and testosterone, here it is, 17A, hypoxyprogesterone. So, and that's, these two are the breakdowns for our sex hormones. But anyway, all these guys come from cholesterol, so a lot of people don't really realize that. But aldosterone is a breakdown of cholesterol. So what I'm saying is if you don't have good fasting fed, let's say, practice, you're not going to regulate aldosterone well. If you have, let's say, cholesterol issues, again, you probably have aldosterone issues. If you are taking hormonal supplements, you're going to have aldosterone issues because it works like sort of a scale. So if you're taking pregnenolone or you're taking progesterone, you're going to have aldosterone issues. And again, this is, all the way back to your heart, all the way back to how you were able to regulate, your immune system and bacterial control. Okay. So we need to, and we don't, and medical science does not understand well. And how do I know this? Just by the evidence of prescriptions. The damage done by steroids and hormones getting in the middle of this graphic, that really, you don't kind of want to get in the middle of this unless something is super duper severe, because this is just how your body works. So you don't want to throw pregnenolone in the middle of this process, when you're in, let's say, a fed state, because you're still making cholesterol. So you guys kind of see what happens here in the horror show that kind of medical science has put us in. And again, some of it good meaning, let's just say. So how does all this work? Well, again, cholesterol, right? And I won't go into how we regulate cholesterol here, but let's just say aldosterone is kind of also involved in that control. So this is another study. Emerging clinical importance of the role of aldosterone in metabolic syndrome and resistant hypertension. So does aldosterone, basically our ability to pick up and control salt and water and fluids, does this play a role in some of these other diseases? So accumulating evidence indicates that the cardiovascular and renal abnormalities associated with insulin resistance are mediated in part by aldosterone acting on the mineralocorticoid receptor. Although we have known that the mineralocorticoid receptor blockade attenuates cardiovascular and renal energy. Only recently have we learned that that receptor blockade improves pancreatic insulin release. So blah blah blah. Basically, it's involved, right? So it's involved. And that's important because all of these are, if you think like obesity and metabolic syndrome and diabetes are pretty high level diseases. I mean, we're breaking at kind of a major place, right? But all of this stuff, if you look at diabetes and obesity, metabolic syndrome, that involves the heart, that involves salt, that involves fatty acid processing, that involves energy balance, that involves metabolism. So it involves all of these things that we talk about all the time that are so important to our health. And fasting and fed, again, how do you control that? The easiest way for you to control that is fasting and fed. And again, if you understand fasting and fed and can exercise intermittent fasting principles at home, you won't have diabetes. Your body will heal itself. There is probably a point of no return, but generally, let's just say. All right, so this guy is chloride dynamics after input-output properties of neurons. So I just want to, and again, this gets super complicated and but the big thing is you have sort of these electrical potentials, and you can think of it as like magnets. So, how do I keep something out of a cell? Well, I want a lot of that opposing magnetism, right, to keep something out of a cell. If I want something inside of a cell, I want a lot of that attracting magnetism that's going to pull stuff through that cell wall. Does that make sense? Hopefully it does. And so chloride cells are negative on the inside. Chloride is a negative ion. And so chloride and the accumulation of chloride, which is part of sodium chloride, will help sort of open up that cell permeability. And that's what this is saying. Okay. Well, I think, this is just saying that aldosterone is part of and this is what I think we just looked at, but aldosterone is part of our cardiovascular system, which we know, right? So all this pretty important stuff on salt. Again, if you have specific questions, it's hard because salt is so general, or sodium chloride is so general. So if you have specific questions, ask them in the thread, ask them underneath the video, and we'll answer them and get to them, because I know somebody's going to, have how much salt should I take every day, and those type questions. So frankly, I don't know. What I'm telling you from the research is, at least if you're a mouse, 4% of your diet or 10% of your diet can be salt with really no bad effects other than if you have H. pylori. And if you have H. pylori, then we probably need to watch and manage that situation a little closer than, let's say, a normal Joe would. So anyway, hopefully we've answered your questions. Again, what kind of salt should you buy? It's all of them are probably good. The most simple salt is probably Morton's table salt. And that's just straight processed NaCl that's iodized, and that will, do the trick. But you may be better off in getting a salt that has more minerals associated with it, so trace minerals. So again, if a salt is pink, that's just indicating that it has, some different aspects than a white processed salt. So hopefully that's been useful. You guys have a good day. Have a good weekend. Love you guys. Stay healthy.